Hello and welcome to QIP Mains 2020, a series of video lectures where we discuss the questions, answers and approach to the answers for the questions which have been asked in our mains test series. So the discussion in this video shall be focused around the question, highlight the provisions given in Article 360 of the Constitution of India, also enumerate the effects of such mechanisms on the overall functioning of our country. So as far as this discussion is concerned, let us now clear the expectations right at the outset. First, we will start the discussion that why we have taken this question, keeping special focus on the past year question paper as well as important themes for mains 2020. We shall discuss that there are particular reasons that why we have chosen this particular question. Then we will discuss how to decode this question, mainly with respect to the demand as well as the subparts of the question. Then we will discuss the sample answer also. In this particular case, we will also discuss the basic concept, which is the Article 360 itself, which shall be very important for answering this particular question. Now the topic of emergency shall be covered in the GS2 syllabus of Features of Indian Constitution. And as far as the past year question is concerned, recently in 2018, UPSC had asked, under what circumstances can the financial emergency be proclaimed by the President of India? What consequences follow when such a declaration remains in force? So you can see that the question related to financial emergency has already been asked. And in 2020, we know that in the wake of COVID-19 crisis, a lot of constraints have been imposed on the government of India, mainly with respect to loss of revenue of the government and decline in economic activity. And hence there was a lot of rumor going around that whether the central government should impose or should actually implement the provisions given in Article 360 or not. And hence in this regard, the financial emergency provisions were in news, and that's why we have taken this question for mains 2020. So before going into the sample answer, let us first discuss the basic concepts which shall be needed to answer this particular question. So the best way to understand any provision related to Constitution is the original text of the Constitution itself. So we have opened up the PDF which you can find on the Law Ministry website. And as you can see that this is the most updated copy of the Constitution. So if we try to understand that which is that part of the Constitution which deals with the emergency provisions, then we will have to go to the contents of the Constitution, and in that part 18 deals with the emergency provisions. If we talk about Article 352, it deals with the proclamation of emergency. 353 deals with effect of proclamation of emergency. 354 deals with application of provisions relating to distribution of revenues while a proclamation of emergency is in operation. And finally, Article 360 deals with provision as to financial emergency. So Article 360 deals with the provisions as to financial emergency. And the clause 1 of Article 360 itself declares that the President is satisfied that a situation has arisen whereby the financial stability or credit of India or of any part of the territory thereof is threatened, he may by a proclamation make a declaration to that effect. So what is needed is the satisfaction of the President. So basically the Council of Ministers recommend that the situation has arisen. And there are two conditions under which the provisions of the financial emergency can be implemented. One of them is when the financial stability of India or the credit of India is threatened. And this may also be a part of India, and it is not necessary that whole India should be going through the financial stability crisis. Even let's say a state or a combination of the states or even a region can go through this particular problem for the center to declare provisions of financial emergency. Now, as far as the conditions of proclamations are concerned, first and foremost, such a proclamation can be revoked by a subsequent proclamation. So once the financial emergency has been implemented, it does not require a revocation from the Parliament. It can be revoked by just another notification by the President. But Nonetheless, all such proclamations shall be laid before each House of Parliament and shall cease to operate at the expiration of 2 months unless before the expiration of that period it has been approved by resolutions of both Houses of Parliament. So once a proclamation is made, it is active or activated or in effect only for 2 months. If within the 2 months period it has been approved by the Houses of the Parliament, it extends, otherwise it expires. So these were the provisions dealing with the implementation part of the financial emergency. But what are the effects or impact once the financial emergency kicks in is governed by rest of the articles. For example, the clause 3 of Article 360 says that during the period any such proclamation as is mentioned in clause 1 is in operation, the executive authority of the union shall extend to giving of directions to any state to observe such canons of financial propriety as may be specified in the direction, and to the giving of such other directions as the President may deem necessary and adequate for the purpose. So what this clause means is that once a financial emergency comes into play, the autonomy of the states as far as the financial matters are concerned ends then and there. And the union government becomes empowered to give whatever financial orders it can or it wants to give to the states, and it's the duty of the states to follow such financial instructions from the center. So if you compare it with the normal circumstances, right now Prime Minister of India cannot give instructions to the state as to follow certain financial obligations, and especially if those matters deal with the matters of state list. For example, if a state wants to run a scheme in policing, they have the full right to do it. But during financial emergency, if the central government feels that this scheme of policing is going to hurt the cause of financial management of our country, then Prime Minister can give that order and state shall have to stall that scheme. Now, clause 3 talked about the directions. And now the clause 4 talks about what all such directions can carry. So it says that notwithstanding anything in this constitution means that it doesn't matter whatever is written in this constitution, if such a direction is issued as in clause 3 which we just discussed, it can also include provision requiring the reduction of salaries and allowances of all or any class of persons serving in connection with the affairs of a state. So the central government can instruct the state governments to reduce the salaries of their state employees. Also, such instructions can carry provision requiring all money bills or other bills to which the provisions of Article 207 apply to be reserved for the consideration of President after they have passed the legislature of the state. So what happens is that once a money bill passes the legislative assembly of a state, it is directly sent to the governor. But in cases of financial emergency, center can ask the governor to reserve all money bills for the consideration of the President. So obviously, center wants to ensure that whether the states are carrying out their financial obligations responsibly or not in the context of emergency. And that is why if the center wants, all the money bills of the states shall be first submitted to President. President will go through it and then it will be returned back for the passage. Also, whenever we talk about the autonomy and independence of our higher judiciary, we generally talk about non-financial emergency times, because whenever the financial emergency kicks in, the central government or the president gets the power to even impinge upon the salary as well as the allowances of our higher judiciary. Because the subsection B says that it shall be competent for the president, which means that it shall be okay for the president during the period of any proclamation, that is the financial emergency proclamation, to issue directions for reduction of salaries and allowances of all or any class of persons serving in connection with the affairs of the union, including the judges of Supreme Court and the judges of High Court. So you can see that even the salaries of higher judiciary can be reduced despite the constitutional guarantee, because the financial emergency provisions says notwithstanding anything in this constitution. At the outset, it made it clear that whatever has been said in the constitution so far will not be applicable in the following cases, and in the following cases, this is the provision which shall be applicable. So before starting to answer any question, it is very important that we first identify the parts of the question. because the marks are ultimately distributed over the parts of the question. So in this particular example, we can see that highlight the provision given in Article 360 of the Constitution of India. That is one part. Then also enumerate the effects of such mechanisms on overall functioning of our country is the second part. So in the first part, you have to focus on the provisions. In the second part, you have to enumerate the effects, or you can call as impacts of such provision. Now, as far as identification of key term is concerned, we can see that highlight is one key term, Article 360's next key term, then in the second part, enumerate as well as effects. So we can see that there are four main key terms which should be addressed in our answer. Next comes the answer structure. So as we have seen in the past as well, all the answers should have an introduction as well as the conclusion. And the main body part should address the key demand of the question. The introduction should be such which should establish the current context. So you should be aware of the fact that why this particular question has been chosen, and that is because of the COVID situation. Then the body part should address both the parts of the question, which is provision of the financial emergency as well as effects of financial emergency. And finally, the conclusion should have historical context as well as the decision of the government to not invoke the provisions of Article 360. Now here it is important to mention that as far as introduction and conclusion are concerned, you have a freedom to choose different kinds of introduction. But you should also keep in mind that introduction should be such which should be connected to the body itself, and it should not be just any random statement about the parts of the question. So finally, it's time for us to discuss the sample answer. So as we have already discussed in the structure slide, that the introduction should be about why there is a talk of implementation of the Article 360. So economic disruptions due to COVID-19 has triggered a debate whether India should evoke financial emergency provisions under Article 360 or not. Then, as we have already discussed, two key demands of the question are provision under Article 360 and effects of financial emergency. So under the provisions of Article 360, as we have seen in the earlier slides and we have already understood, that it provides for financial emergency, a situation where financial stability or credit of India or of any part of territory thereof is threatened. So we have seen that there are only two conditions under which the provisions of financial emergency can be invoked, that is financial stability or credit of India. As we have already understood, it empowers the President to proclaim a financial emergency, and it provides for parliamentary approval via a simple majority. So these are the provisions which have to be highlighted. Now here it is important to note that under highlight, you just have to mention important provisions, and you just don't have to mention all the provisions. And so moving on to the next part of the answer, that is about effects of financial emergency. So first and the foremost, it extends the executive authority of the center to give directions to any state regarding financial management, and any such direction may include provisions regarding reduction of salaries as well as reduction of benefits to state employees, as we have already seen. Now, as soon as the financial emergency provisions kicks in, the center can direct the governor to mandatorily reserve the financial bills of the states for consideration of President, and at the same time President can also notify the reduction in the salaries of central government employees, including judges of higher judiciary, which means that both judges of High Court as well as judges of Supreme Court. So this is the body part. And finally, moving on to the conclusion. So in the conclusion part, we have said that thus, during the operation of financial emergency, the center acquires full control over the states in financial matter. No financial emergency has been declared so far in India, and current government has also decided to manage the finances without invoking Article 360. So in this one conclusion, we have summarized the impact of financial emergency, then we have given the historical context as well, and then we have also again repeated that the decision of the government to not go with the provision of Article 360 is the reason that why this has come into the news. And finally, let's put our answer to the test. So as far as the structure is concerned, the answer had an intro which was short as well as relevant. Then the body of the answer addressed both part 1 as well as part 2 of the question. And then finally the conclusion of the answer had the historical context as well as the current decision. As far as the presentation is concerned, we used headings as well as subheadings. Also in the answer, we used very simple and short sentences, and we used the simple language as well. And the answer was well within the word limit of 168 words.